Okay, so I think this is just a universal thing that pretty much everyone who likes to read feels at some point, which is that, you go on BookTube, you go on Bookstagram, you look at your friends, whatever, and you're just blown away by how much people are reading. And I think no matter how much you're reading, whether or not you're going through a period where you're not reading very much, or where you're reading 4 or 5 books a month, but you're still like shocked that people are reading 11 or 12 books and you just don't get how it's happening and you want to read more. I mean, I've definitely been in both of those positions, and so I feel like everyone on the internet has made this video already, but these are just my tips and tricks for how I have started to read a little bit more, although I will say that it's really easy to quantify reading if you count how many books you've read, and I would say that just take this with a grain of salt because that's not the only metric that matters, Just keep in mind that how much you read is a metric, but it's not the only metric. But with that in mind, it's definitely nice to be able to read as much as you possibly can. And if you sort of feel like you want to read more, but there's no space for it in your life, or you're just unsure how to add to the amount that you already read, even though a lot of people have made this video, I think I have some suggestions that I haven't really heard before, and so I figured I'd put it out there in case it could help someone. So let's get started. Suggestion number 1 is read while you're doing other things. I don't know how many meals I've had in front of the TV or in front of my laptop while YouTube videos are playing, but if I can just replace the YouTube video on my laptop with a book on a Kindle app, that's, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour of reading more than I do every single day, which is something. It definitely adds up, I'm telling you. And then beyond that, you can listen to an audiobook while you're walking your dog or mowing the lawn or painting. These are all things that I've done in the last week, which is why I'm thinking of them. All these places where you might otherwise sit in silence or listen to music, occasionally you can swap that out with an audiobook and get a little bit more reading in. So yeah, reading while you do other things is a surprisingly effective tool to read more. Which brings me to my next suggestion, number 2, which is audiobooks. Now, I think almost every booktuber who makes one of these videos suggests this, but I cannot stress it enough. Using audiobooks genuinely increases the amount I read in a month by a factor of 2. I can read 5 books if I don't use audiobooks, and I can read 10 or 11 if I do. It's crazy how much more I read when I also use audiobooks. For me, that's a little bit difficult sometimes because I tend to be super picky with my audiobooks. So I have a couple of rules that I have, but if I find an audiobook that fits those rules, I will definitely pick it up. So for example, I really like memoirs narrated by the author. So I always try to pick those up in audiobook form rather than physical book if there's a memoir I want to read. I also tend to only pick up audiobooks that are less than 10 hours just because I find that in my attention span, I just am more likely to DNF and drop a book if the audiobook is super long. And then also I look to see the ratings on Audible for the audiobook because really good narration, if you have a book with a cast of characters or a really good narrator, that can totally change the quality of your enjoyment of the experience with the audiobook. So those are some things that I'd suggest looking at before you pick up an audiobook if you don't usually use audiobooks, but I'm telling you, using audiobooks in general is so helpful. The third suggestion I have might put you off at first, but hear me out. And that suggestion is buy a Kindle. So I have a Kindle here. Woo, see, it's super nice, it's super lightweight and thin, and it's really nice to have a device that's exclusively meant for reading, and it's easier to hold than a book, right? I can hold it with one hand, flip the page with one hand, super easy, and you can carry around hundreds of books on it at once. And so every time I travel, I bring my Kindle with me. I'd say probably 80 or 90% of the books that I read are on Kindle. These Kindles, which tend to be cheaper actually, don't have, they're not lit. There's no blue light. It doesn't keep you awake. It feels kind of like reading a regular book. You can read it outside, and it's increased the amount that I read and increased the enjoyment of my reading experience by so much. Now, I know it can feel frivolous to purchase an entirely new device just to read, and I totally get that. I think that's very valid, especially when there's Kindle apps on your phone and on your computer, and you can read ebooks without a physical device. However, I have one argument in defense of buying a Kindle, which is that I bought this Kindle 6 years ago for $65. I have used it every single year since then, and it still works almost as well as it did the day I bought it. The battery lasts about 2 weeks instead of 3 now, but that's the only change I've noticed. Everything else is still perfect. Something so sturdy and that will last you so long, dropping $70 now could really be worth it. My fourth suggestion is to read instead of scrolling. I don't know about you, but I noticed that I have this habit when I'm waiting in line, or when I've just woken up in the morning, or when I'm doing a whole host of other things, that when I get bored, my automatic instinct is to pull out my phone, scroll on Instagram, scroll on Facebook, message people, whatever it might be. I'm just constantly scrolling, looking for things that might interest me. And I still do that to a certain extent, and I think that it's hard to stop doing entirely. But what I have found is that if you have books on your Kindle app, then you can read instead of scrolling. And this is kind of along the same vein of reading while you're eating meals. Waiting in line to grab coffee in the morning or whatever it might be, just like reading a book kind of is the same idea as scrolling. You're used to pulling out your phone and clicking on an app and looking at something. And reading is much more productive than scrolling on Instagram. And we spend kind of hours a day just scrolling. And so even if you can replace a couple of those with reading, you're suddenly reading way more than you were before. And again, you don't have to make time in your day to do it. You're just replacing a bad habit with a better habit. That has helped me a lot, and I would highly recommend that as well. Okay, my fifth suggestion here is read what you want to read. So I know some people like to set strict TBRs for themselves and read what they said they'd read at the beginning of each month, just go through that list, and it helps them with choice paralysis, and it helps them plan out what they're reading and how their life looks. Personally, I am not like that. I feel like if I set exactly what I'm going to read for myself in any given week or month, it starts to feel like a chore or schoolwork, and then I start to procrastinate on it, and I'll watch YouTube instead of reading because I don't feel like reading the books that I'm supposed to read next. If you're like me, if you can increase the amount of choices you have, that'll help so much. At any given time, I have 10, 15 books that I can choose between reading, and if there's new books that I want to read, I don't feel guilty for going out and trying to read those instead. And I kind of allow myself to not stick to any set list of books to read so that I'll read more, because I won't be like, oh, I don't want to read this book, right? If there's a book that I don't want to read, I don't read it. I pick up a different one, but I'm still reading. And so if you give yourself a ton of options, then there's bound to be one book out of 20, 30 that you're looking at that you'll like. And so giving yourself more options is super helpful. Also, if you aren't enjoying a book, stop reading it. You don't need to finish every single book you pick up. I found that when I try to force myself through books, I just end up not wanting to read anymore because I'm like, oh man, that was such a terrible experience. What if I waste another 7 hours reading a book that I didn't like? And then I'm just like, ugh, I might as well just watch YouTube. I know I'm going to enjoy the next YouTube video I watch. Or, watch New Girl again, because I watched that 7 times and it hasn't let me down yet, right? But if you just drop a book, right? If you've read for an hour or two of a certain book and you're not enjoying it and you drop it, so what? The world's not going to end. Dropping that one book is not going to kill you. If anything, continuing to read that book might kill your desire to read anymore. So don't feel guilty. Drop books. It doesn't matter. So this brings me to suggestion 6, which is, I know I just went on and on about having 10, 20, 30 options at any given time. And you might be thinking, that's a lot of books to buy. Where are you getting that income? You're a college student. And the answer to that is, I have discovered the version of online shopping that I love, and that is Libby. Libby is an app that connects you to all your local libraries. You can borrow ebooks and audiobooks via this one app that keeps track of all the books you borrowed from all these different libraries, and the UI is beautiful. There's libbyapp.com on the computer, and then there's a Libby app on your phone, and both of them are so easy to use and so convenient. You can read the book on there, you can listen to the audiobook on there, you can download that audiobook onto your Kindle if you want to read it there. You can see here, at any given time, I have 20 or 30 books on hold, and I have 5 to 15 books checked out. And just having that wide range of options totally for free is so nice. And then every time there's a new book that I really feel like reading, I just go through my whole list of libraries and I find if it's available anywhere, and if it's not, I just put myself on the holds list at whichever library has the shortest wait time. And then 2 weeks go by, sometimes a month, sometimes longer, depending on how popular the book is. And then suddenly I have the book. I'm telling you, it's so addicting. It's totally free, which means it's accessible to everybody. All you need is a library card. I would highly recommend it. It increases the amount of options you have by so much, and it makes it that much easier to read because there's always a book that is available that you also want to read. In addition to that, it depends on what your local library is doing, but for me, we're allowed to put physical books on hold and then go and pick them up. And so I realized that with coronavirus, a lot of people aren't checking out physical books. And so 4 books that I've been wanting to read for a really long time were available physically. And so I grabbed them, and then I sprayed them with Lysol, and then I quarantined them in the corner of my house for 24 hours, and now I have them. And so not only using Libby, but also using a physical library is a great way to get books of different formats, right? You can get ebooks, audiobooks, and physical books, and reading different formats is super helpful, and they're all library books, so they're all free, which is super nice. But yeah, so Libby and libraries in general, just use them. If you have them near you, use them. Even if you don't, with Libby, you don't need to live near a library in order to get library books. So cost does not need to be a limiting factor in getting books. And don't be afraid to put things on hold. For the longest time, I was like, oh, I want to read this now, but it's not available, so whatever. I just won't even bother. Who cares? Putting yourself on the holds list is so clutch. You know, even if 2 weeks have gone by, you're like, oh yeah, I did want to read that book, and then you can read it. So put yourself on hold lists, and you'll find that sometimes holds come in quicker than you thought, and waiting a week or 2 weeks or a couple of days or however long isn't that bad for a lot of books that you're excited to read. And then my final suggestion is constantly look for recommendations. So before I discovered BookTube, I think the only way I really got recommendations for books was either from friends or kind of looking through Goodreads lists, trying to find books for my age range, or looking at like top 100 books you need to read before you graduate college, whatever, those kinds of lists. And honestly, that was not a really great way to find book recommendations. Discovering BookTube is the best thing that happened for my reading. And I would highly recommend having a place that you write down every single book that you get recommended that you want to read. If you're in the middle of watching a BookTube video and someone mentions a book and it has a pretty cover and the subject of the book sounds super interesting, write it on the list. It doesn't matter whether or not you're sure you want to get to it. If it sounds mildly cool, add it to that list. And then that way, when you're scrolling through Libby, deciding what books you want to put on hold, you have one place you can go back to and scroll through or look through if you write it down physically and be like, oh yeah, there was this book that sounded really interesting. Let's see if that's available. And you have a list of books that you've compiled that you can look for. If you just try to remember it in your head, I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, you're not going to remember it. So just writing down every single book that sounds interesting to you, so you can go back and refer to it when you're looking for a book that you want to read if nothing in front of you sounds interesting. It's so helpful. For me, I use this app on my computer called Notion that is a really convenient database with a really clean UI. I really value clean UIs. I don't know if you've noticed that about me. That's why I don't like Goodreads, that's why I like Libby, and that's why I like Notion. And I just have a list of all the books that sound interesting to me. I've gotten these books from BookTube, from Bookstagram, from recommendations from friends. Any place that I've gotten a book recommendation is on this list, and I'm constantly adding to it, and just having this running list of books that sound interesting to me has been so helpful in finding books to read. So suggestion 8 is keep track of any recommendations you get from any source and always look for new books to read. And suggestion 9 is also keep track of what you've read. So for me, that same database, I just have a column that is whether it's borrowed from the library, whether I'm in progress, or whether I've read it, and the date that I read it. So that really works for me. I know people who keep track of it in their bullet journal or on a Word doc. I kept track of it in an Excel spreadsheet for a while. Whatever system works for you, keep track of what you read and keep track of what you want to read next. So those are my 9 tips and tricks on how to read more. I really hope some of them help for you. And just remember, the goal of reading isn't to win a competition or read more than the person next to you or whoever you're seeing online. It's just to read more because presumably if you're watching this, you like to read and you want to read more. And you have to keep in mind that there's going to be periods of your life where you're going to read less than others. If you're really busy in school versus if you're in the middle of a pandemic doing kind of nothing else, how much you read is going to change, and that's okay. and trying to force yourself to read more isn't going to make you enjoy reading any more than you currently do. But if you can use any of these tools to try to incorporate reading into your daily life, if you want to read more and you just don't know how to start, that would be great. I hope some of this has been helpful, and I hope everyone's doing well. I will see you next time. Bye.